We're ready for you.
Wonderful. Okay. I'd like to dedicate today's class for a refuah shalema for Chaya Mariah Bas Shoshana Miriam, and she should have a refuah shalema quickly. For Yehuda ben Perel Razel, you should have a refuah shalema, and for those that need healing. So we find ourselves currently in the book of Devarim, the last book of the Torah, the fifth book of the Torah, as we are getting closer to the new year. And as we get closer to the new year, we get closer to the holiday of Simchas Torah, where we celebrate the completion of the 5 books, of reading of the 5 books. So we're always in the last book, the 5th book of Torah, as we are coming closer to Rosh Hashanah, to the new year. And this week's Parsha, Parsha-Ki Tavo, Moshe Rabbeinu instructs the people of Israel, and the Parsha starts off with the instruction as follows: Parsha-Ki Tavo el haaretz, and it will be when you come to the land asher Hashem Elokecha nosen lecha nachala v'yirishta v'yeshavta ba, that when you enter the land which Hashem your God is giving you as an inheritance, you shall take possession of it and settle in it. And following this, the Parsha goes on to talk about the fact that Bnei Yisrael are going to work the land, and they're going to be blessed with produce. And the mitzvah given, the mitzvah given in this week's Parsha is the mitzvah of Bikurim, the commandment to bring the first fruits of the orchard to the Beis HaMikdash, to the Holy Temple, and to declare gratitude for all that Hashem has done for you. So let's take a look, before we go forward into the Parsha, at the name of the Parsha. The name of the Parsha is called Ki Tavo, when you enter. That's the name of the Parsha, as the Parsha talks about when Bnei Yisrael, when the Jewish people are going to enter Eretz Yisrael, the land of Yisrael, of Israel, that Hashem is giving to us. So we always know that every Parsha has a specific name, and the name of the Parsha has an important lesson to teach us and to infuse into all parts of the Parsha and into our lives as we learn these words of Torah. So, Ki Tavo, when you enter, the question arises: at which point, according to the Torah, do we say that entering has occurred? Because the mitzvah is when you enter the land that Hashem is giving to you, that the mitzvah of Bikurim, bringing the first fruits, is incumbent upon the Jewish people. So at which point can we say that the entering has occurred? Do we say that when a person just put their hands into a room that they've entered the room? Or does the person's entire body have to be in the room in order for them to be considered inside the room? And this is an important question to ask as we look at the mitzvah in this week's Parsha-Ki Tavo el haaretz, when you will come into the land, when you will have entered the land. When does that mitzvah of bringing bikurim, bringing the first fruits, when does it apply? Does it apply when a few of the Jewish people have entered the land? Does it apply when all of the people have come into Eretz Yisrael? Do they have to be settled already? What's the meaning of arrival? So the Talmud answers this question, and the Talmud says in Chulin, partial entry is not considered entry. And the same thing Rashi explains at the beginning of this week's Parsha, that when Ki Tavo el haaretz, when you come into the land, refers to the time when they have conquered the land and divided it. We know that the land was divided up between the tribes. And Ki Tavo, when you come to the land and you have this obligation, this mitzvah of Bikurim, becomes incumbent upon the Jewish people after having conquered and divided the land. And the Rebbe says that this is a very important message for us in our daily life. And the message is that we should enter ourselves totally and wholeheartedly when it comes to our service of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, when it comes to serving God. Because when a person becomes fully immersed in their activity and what they are doing, then there is a qualitative change that takes place. And in order for that change to take place, it depends on how involved a person is. So in order to reach a stage of Ki Tavo, of entering, of being totally immersed, a person has to put aside everything else and really dedicate themselves to the mitzvah at hand and really become involved in the mitzvah that they are doing, in the act that they are doing, whether it is learning Torah, whether it is being involved in helping somebody, that the person should become completely involved in what they are doing, so that the activity, so that the action has the ability to really, really make a difference. And even though oftentimes we think of ourselves in terms of having the side of ourselves that does mitzvahs, the side of ourselves that's involved in studying Torah, and then the side of ourselves that is busy with mundane things. If we have the ability to involve ourselves in a mitzvah, in a commandment fully, and put everything else aside, what will happen is that we will find that there is a fundamental change in the way we live our lives, because we are fully immersed in that Torah learning. We're fully immersed in that mitzvah. And in fact, what happens then is that even when we go about our daily business, which we tend to think of as separate from our godly and spiritual and purposeful life, we will find that we have entered, meaning we have the ability to recognize that we bring Hashem and we are partnering with Hashem in every single aspect of our life. There won't be this distinction of our spiritual journey and our physical journey. They will become one and the same. And the Rebbe, to illustrate this, talks about how we see this, in fact, with the neshama coming into a body. We see that at birth, Hashem puts the neshama into the body, and the neshama becomes totally one with that body, so much so that the body becomes alive, just as the neshama, which is a piece of Hashem, is alive, so too the body, because the neshama has fully entered into the body, it too has become alive. And this is the message of this week's parsha, that we should enter into every mitzvah that we do and every action that we do to serve Hashem. Then our service to Hashem and our Judaism will become alive. So that's the message, the main and underlying message of this week's parsha. So the portion goes on to say in Pasuk Beis, "V'lakachta mireishis kol pri adama asher tavi me'artzocha asher Hashem Elokecha nosein lach," that when the land is fully settled, you shall take some of the first from every fruit of the ground which you gather in from your land, God your God is giving to you. And what should you do with it? V'samta batene, you should put it in a basket. V'halachta el hamakam asher yivcha Hashem Elokecha l'shaken shemo sham, and you should go to the place which God your God will choose to make his name rest there. This is talking about the holy temple, the holy Beis Hamikdash, the mitzvah of bringing the first fruit. This mitzvah is such an incredible mitzvah that the Midrash says that it was in the merit of this mitzvah that the world was created. We read the first pasuk in Bereshis, the first verse in the Torah says, Bereshis bara Elokim, and there, on commenting on that verse, it says that that Bereshis, for the sake of Rashis, and one of the things in the Torah that is called Rashis is Bikurim. It's called Rashis Bikurei Ad Masecha. So we need to take a look at this mitzvah of Bikurim and what is so special about it, that for this mitzvah the world was created. This mitzvah, as the Torah tells us over here, the farmer would take the fruit and he would put it into the basket. And a farmer who was wealthy, who had the means, would put it in a silver basket or a gold basket. Someone who was not as wealthy would put it into a straw basket. And they would come to the Beis Hamikdash. They would come to the holy temple and bring these fruits to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to Hashem. And there was great simcha, there was great joy and great fanfare in the performance of this mitzvah. The description of this, it says that they would, an ox walked in front of the people, and actually later that ox was brought as an offering, and they would cover the horns with gold and an olive leaf wreath, and they would walk to the beat of music. It was a very, very great fanfare and joy. A flute played before them, and the officers from Yerushalayim would come out to greet them. The craftsmen of Yerushalayim would stand up for them. Why all this fanfare? Such joy, such ceremony. What was it all about? If you think about it, what were they bringing? They were bringing a few fruit, not even worth so much money. It's not like they were presenting the crown jewels. They were bringing the first fruit, not really worth a lot of money. So what is it that is so special about the Bikurim? So the Alshich answers this question and says that that when a person lives in the land flowing with milk and honey and is comfortable and Hashem is providing everything, and we planted and the fruit grew, so Hashem gave this special mitzvah of Bikurim to remind us of something very, very important, that everything we own and everything that it produces are all from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. They are all from God. You know, later on in this week's Parsha, the Parsha talks about blessings and curses that were given on the two mountains, Har Gerizim and Har Eval, and the blessings that would come about if Bnei Yisrael will follow the mitzvahs of the Torah, and God forbid the opposite. And over there, one of the brachas is Baruch HaGever asher lo ya'aseh pesel u'masecha ma'aseh yedei choresh. Blessed is the person who didn't make an idol, the workmanship of man. So the question is asked, Reb Moshe Feinstein asked this question, and many others, why does this person deserve a special bracha? A person who didn't make an idol, the workmanship of man. Why does that deserve a special bracha to be put on a platform more than any other mitzvah? After all, what did the person do? He didn't worship idols. But yes, that's commendable, but why a special bracha? And so he answers that it's possible that a person could come to think that they earn their living by the work of their hands, that when we work and we earn money, it was the work that we did that gave us the success and the parnasa, the livelihood that we have. And that, he says, is called pesel u'masecha ma'aseh b'nei adam. The idol being what? What is the idol? Ma'aseh b'nei adam. The work that man has performed. That a person should falsely believe that it is ma'aseh yedei adam, the work that they do that produces the livelihood, that produces the success. If a person realizes and lives their lives going out to work every day, putting in the effort, but realizing that the success is from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it is from God, then such a person deserves to have a bracha, a blessing. And the truth is that the bracha is many, many fold. Even thinking about how such a person lives their life. When a person lives their life thinking that what they do is what's creating their success, that person is constantly plagued with jealousy, with fear, with looking at what someone else has and thinking that that's taking away from them. But a person who realizes that everything that they do is only to be a vessel to receive Hashem's blessing and that the success is the blessing that Hashem gives to them, and that their effort is the vessel to receive that blessing, then such a person lives a much more tranquil life. Such a person makes sure to set aside time for Hashem in their life. So not only will a person receive the bracha as promised in this week's parsha, but a person will live a life that is based on emunah, that is based on faith, and that in and of itself is a bracha, is a blessing. There's a story told of a doctor who came to his Rav, and he was very concerned because he said that people were going to his competition, and he was afraid that he wasn't going to make a living. Nobody was coming to him. So the Rav gave him some advice, and he said to him, what you should do is, when someone calls up to make an appointment, tell them that you only have time in 3 months from now. You're very busy, you have lots of patients, and there's no room to see any patients now. But in 3 months' time, they'll be able to come to see you. And in that way, the Rav said, people will see that you're a very sought-after doctor, and they'll want to come to you. And this will give you a great reputation. And so the doctor follows his advice, and it was very successful advice. He became wildly successful. It actually came to a reality that you had to wait. A person would have to wait a long time to be able to get into the doctor. One day, the Rav calls the doctor to make an appointment. And the doctor says to the Rav, I'm really sorry, but you're going to have to wait 3 months. I don't have time to see you. So the Rav says to the doctor, don't you remember? I'm the one who gave you that advice. I'm the one who gave you the success, the secret to the success that you have. And now you're using that line on me. You're telling me that you don't have time to see me. And the nimshal is that Hashem is the one that gives us success. And we should always remember this at all times. We should never turn around to Hashem and say we're too busy. We don't have time to fit God into our schedule. And we should make sure that we make time to pray, that we make time to be kind, that we make time for success, because that is our success. Our success is our connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to Hashem. Now today, we don't have Bikurim. We don't have this mitzvah because we don't have the Beis HaMikdash, the Holy Temple. But Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses knew through divine inspiration, through Ruach HaKodesh, that day was going to come. And therefore, he established the concept of prayer, that we should daven 3 times a day. And this takes the place of the Bikurim, and reminds us, not only seasonally, but actually every single day, that everything we have comes from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, comes from God. And this is something that we need to remember. And there are many prayers. One of the prayers, Mizmor L'Soda, a song of thanks that actually recently we learned in a Tehillim class. Davening is Bikurim. It's our time to reflect and to be grateful and to realize that everything we have is a gift from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and we should always remain connected to Hashem. We should always remain connected to our God in heaven. Now, as the Bikurim were brought into the base Hamikdash, into the holy temple, there was a declaration that was made. And in that course of that declaration, one of the statements that was made, it's in verse 15, chapter 26, in this week's portion, Hashkifa mim'on kodshcha min hashamayim uvarech es amcha es Yisrael v'es ha'adama asher nasata lanu kasher nishbata la'avasenu eretz zovas chalav u'devash. Look down from your holy abode in heaven and bless your people Israel. And the land that you have given to us, like you swore to our fathers, a land flowing with milk and with honey. So not only did we bring the fruit, but we made sure that the bringing of the fruit was accompanied by prayers that reminded us of the purpose of the Bikurim. And in the pasuk, in this verse that we just read, it says, "Look down from your holy abode in heaven and bless your people Israel." So the question is asked. We know every word in Torah is thought out. There's nothing extra. There's nothing less. And we see here a double expression: your people Israel, Amcha Yisrael. Why the double expression? Amcha, your people, is Yisrael. So why are your people mentioned and Israel, and why are your people mentioned before Israel? So in a discourse, it's explained that Yisrael refers to the Torah scholars, and your people refers to the simple Jews who observe the mitzvahs loyally. And in the Gemara, in the Talmud, there's a discussion and a debate as to what is greater. Is the study of Torah greater, or is the learning of a mitzvah greater, or is the performance of mitzvah greater? And the conclusion that the Talmud comes to is Torah study is greater since it leads to practical observance. So even according to those sages who say that Torah study is greater than the performance of mitzvahs, the reason that the Torah study is considered greater is because of the practical end, which is the performance of the mitzvah. So your people is mentioned first, because what is your people referring to? Not the Talmidei Chachamim, not the Torah scholars, but the Jews who are keeping the mitzvahs. And we see how important they are because and that's why they're mentioned first, that the observance of mitzvahs is what is most important. And that's why it's important for us also to remember this at all times, because sometimes when we have an opportunity to do a mitzvah, we might put it off and we might say, I'm not ready for this mitzvah. It doesn't resonate with me. I don't really feel it. I don't understand it. But we should remember that the performance of the mitzvah is so great that even without that understanding and without necessarily feeling the connection is made anyway. And from that observance, that will be perhaps with a little bit less of a connection in the mind and even in the heart, ultimately mitzvahs refine, and we will come to that greater level. So it's a very important thing for us to remember. I came across a very interesting discussion about this mitzvah. I said, you know what, we're women learning together, so we're going to look at this interesting discussion. Generally speaking, when it comes to mitzvahs, women are exempt from many mitzvahs that are time-bound. And the reason for this is that the woman is the akeres habayis, the mainstay of the home, and in that capacity, which is such an important capacity, it's the foundation and the strength of the whole Yiddishkeit and the whole Jewish nation. Hashem says, I'm going to absolve you from certain mitzvahs so that you will not be taken away from this primary focus. So when the tithe was brought, there was a whole declaration that was made. And when was this tithing declaration to be made? So Rashi says, when you finish separating the tithes of the third year, meaning in the fourth year of the second year cycle. And the Rambam, Maimonides, says, at the time of Mincha, the afternoon service, on the Yom Tov of the last day of Pesach of the fourth year, the declaration, also the Rambam says, so it's a specific time, and the Rambam also says that that declaration can only be made during the day. Now the Minchas Chinuch, the Sefer HaChinuch, ruled that women are exempt from making a tithe declaration. Why? A, because they weren't given a portion in the land of Israel, so they cannot say the words, the land which you have given to us. That's part of the declaration. And B, women are exempt from mitzvahs that are bound to a specific time. Rebbe Eliyahu of London comments on this halachic ruling, and he disagrees, and he says women are obligated in this mitzvah even though they were not given a portion of the land. Why? Because they can inherit land just like the daughters of Zelophehad. Remember, when the daughters of Zelophehad, who had no brothers, and their father died, and they petitioned and came to Moshe Rabbeinu and said, what about us? Hashem said, yes, they're right. They should get a piece of the land. So now we see, Rebbe Eliyahu says, that women can be obligated in this mitzvah because there are times when women will receive the land, and therefore this expression and this declaration is pertinent to women. Therefore, they can say the words, the land which you have given us. So the Rebbe discusses this. It was in a Sikha in 5749. Okay, so the Rebbe discusses, it's just a very interesting topic for us women to look at. And he talks about this argument, this dispute, whether women are obligated to make this declaration. So the Rebbe says that the Rambam doesn't mention this issue. and from which it appears that Rambam maintained that women are obligated to make the declaration, because otherwise he would have mentioned their exemption explicitly. So I'm just going to remind you what the Rambam says. The Rambam says at the time of Mincha, on the Yom Tov of the last day of Pesach of the 4th year, and that the declaration needs to be made only during the day. So no mention at all about whether women are obligated. So the Rebbe says the fact that the Rebbe doesn't mention that seems to be that women are obligated in this mitzvah, because otherwise he would have mentioned their exemption explicitly, as he did in the case of the first fruits declaration in another section. However, the Rebbe says, this leaves us with a problem posed by the Minchas Chinuch, because Rambam states explicitly that the tithe declaration is a mitzvah bound to a specific time, right? We said Mincha on the Yom Tov of the last day of Pesach. So if it's a mitzvah shehazman grama, if it's a mitzvah that is time bound, surely women would be exempt from this. So the Rebbe goes on to explain as follows. When a mitzvah is not fulfilled at a specific time, it could be for one of two reasons. Reason number one is that there's no obligation in Jewish law to perform this mitzvah at a specific time. Reason number two, in principle, one would observe the mitzvah at this time, but it is impossible to perform it for some other reason. So the former category A represents a true time-bound mitzvah from which women are exempt. But the second reason is not a mitzvah that is bound to a particular time. It applies at all times, and it's not observed at a specific time due to practical considerations. So therefore, women would be obligated in this time of mitzvah. And the Rebbe is going to go on to explain how in our case over here, we're going to see this is the case. Over here, it could be argued that the mitzvah of making a declaration at the end of the tithing season falls into the latter category, because the Torah simply instructs us to make a declaration when the tithing is complete. The fact that this occurs at a particular time of the year is due to the fact that until then, there's just simply no crops. The crops haven't grown. It's only at this time of the year that the crops appear in the fields, in the orchards, because of the natural phenomenon of seasons which regulate the agricultural cycle, and not because the Torah made this mitzvah obligatory at this time in particular. Therefore, Rambam, Maimonides, was of the opinion that women are obligated to make a tithe declaration just like men, because he says it's not a mitzvah shehazman grama that has a time frame ordained by the Torah. The Torah mentions when it will be done just because practically that's when the crop is going to be harvested. But the Rebbe says at first glance, however, there seems to be a further difficulty here. Because in addition to the fact that the tithe declaration is made, we said at the time of Mincha, afternoon service, on the Yom Tov of the last day of Pesach, which is circumstantial limitation and not a true limitation of time, right? We said the reason it's done at that time is not because it has to be done at that time. It's just that that's when it grows and becomes available. But Rambam also writes that the declaration may be only made during the day. Now we know The mitzvah of tzitzis, for example, the mitzvah of tefillin, those are mitzvahs that are time-bound during the day. That's why women are not obligated in these mitzvahs. Apparently, the requirement to perform this mitzvah during the day is a pure limitation of time that doesn't arise to any circumstantial factor. So why does this not render a woman exempt from the mitzvah? So the Rebbe explains like this. In truth, however, the limitation that this mitzvah may only be performed during the day is not considered to be a limitation of time. It does not include it as one of the mitzvahs shehazman garama, that has to be done at a specific time, which would be sufficient to render a woman exempt. We see this explicitly from the case of sacrifices, which may only be offered during the day. All sacrifices also, the Torah says, may only be brought during the day. And yet, we don't find that women are exempt from bringing sacrifices. There are certain sacrifices that are considered to be hazman grama at specific times, like the holiday sacrifices, and those sacrifices women are exempt from. But all other sacrifices, which have to be brought during the day, a woman is not exempt from those. And therefore, the conclusion the Rambam comes to, and the Rebbe concurs with, is that a woman does have this obligation. It is a mitzvah for a woman to make this declaration in bringing the tithe. And the above brings to light even further importance of women in so many areas of Judaism, which is all the more stressed in our generation immediately prior to the redemption, which will come in the merit of the righteous women of the generation. So the Rebbe always brings every Torah discussion back to practical application. And the Rebbe underlines how important we women are in bringing about the result that Hashem desired in giving this mitzvah of Bikurim. Now, this Parsha is always read 2 weeks before Rosh Hashanah. Yes, ladies, we're almost there. It's almost Rosh Hashanah. And in this week's Parsha, we are told about the brachas that we will have if we keep the Torah. And on the other hand, there are also mentioned the opposite of brachas. If chas v'shalom, if God forbid, the Torah is disobeyed. The rabbis tell us that this is read at the end of the year so that the year will finish, and so too will the curses. This can mean that just like today, the way we fill the laws of bringing offerings without the Beis HaMikdash is by reading about them in the Torah and by praying, so too the negative things that we are told about in this week's Parsha, that God forbid could happen if the Torah is not kept, can be fulfilled just by learning about them in this week's portion, and then we can go on to welcome in the new year with all its brachas and with all its wonderful blessings. Now, so looking at these brachas, at the blessings in chapter 28 of this week's Parsha. So it says, V'haya im shemaya tishma'u. V'haya im shemaya tishma b'kol Hashem elakecha. If you will listen to the voice of the Lord your God, if you will surely listen to the voice of the Lord your God, lishmar, to keep, la'asos, to do as kol mitzvosov, all his commandments, asher anochi mitzavacha hayom, that I'm commanding you today, unesoncha Hashem elokecha elyon al kol goyei haaretz, and the Lord your God will make you an elite nation above all the nations on the earth. We see here in plain writing that Hashem promises us that for keeping the mitzvahs of the Torah, we will be blessed with all that is good. And it's interesting because it says over here, it says, if we keep if you keep all the mitzvahs that I have commanded you. So first of all, can we keep all the mitzvahs? Is it possible for us to keep all the mitzvahs? You know, when the person would bring the tithes, this week's parsha also talks about the tithes. There was a declaration to be made, right? So one of the things said was, Asisi kachol asher tzivasani. I have done, this is in chapter 26, verse 14. I did everything that you commanded me. Really? Who can come before HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Who can come before the Eibishter, before God, and say, I have done everything that you have commanded me? And yet Hashem tells us this is what we should say when we come before him. So the explanation given is that if a person keeps the crux of the Torah, the primary lesson and goal of the Torah, then they can make this declaration, I did everything that you commanded me. So what is it? What is the primary lesson of the Torah? So Rashi, on the words Asisi kachol tzivasani, writes, so interesting. He says, Samachti v'samachti bo. I was happy and I made others happy. Wow. What an unbelievable lesson that Rashi is giving to us. If we are happy, if we make others happy, we have fulfilled what the Torah wants to teach us. We know Torah is a book of instruction. It's an instruction for how we should live our life, how to live our purpose, how to live the very reason that we were created, to be Hashem's partner in the vision that he had in creating this world. And what does Rashi tell us over here? Remember, Rashi is there to explain the simple meaning of the pasuk. And Rashi says, Samachti, I was happy, and I made others happy. And if you can live by those words, you have lived your purpose. Now we can understand why we know that one of the main reasons for the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash was that we didn't keep the Torah b'simcha, with joy. I believe in the class about Mashiach that my husband is currently giving, the JLI course, he told the story from the Gemara that Eliyahu Hanavi, Elijah the prophet, pointed to two happy people, and he told Rabroka Chazar, that these two, he pointed to them and he said, these two, they are B'nai Olam Haba. What does that mean? They are B'nai Olam Haba. That they are people who merit a portion in the world to come. Now that's kind of astonishing that he should say that, because we know that there's a Mishnah that says Kol Yisrael yesh lahem chelek la'olam haba. Every single Jew has a portion in the world to come. We recite that Mishnah before we start learning Pirkei Avos, ethics of the fathers, because ethics of the fathers is what gives us the ability to have our portion in the world to come. So what did Eliyahu Hanavi mean when he pointed to these two and he said they are B'nai Olam Haba? Is because even though every person has a portion in the world to come, most people receive that portion after the neshama, the soul, has to go through a cleansing process. When Eliyahu Hanavi, when Elijah the prophet pointed at these two and said they are B'nai Olam Haba, what he was saying was they will go directly to Olam Haba. Their neshamas, their souls are not going to need to have any kind of cleansing process in order for them to inherit the land. So Rav Broka went over to these two and asked them, what do they do? What's their occupation? And they said, we are happy people, and when we see sad people, we make them happy. And when we see people who are fighting, we work hard to restore their peace. So we see from this story in the Gemara, in the Talmud, how important it is to make people happy and to be happy that these two earned a direct path to Olam Haba. We also know the famous story of Hillel when he when the non-Jewish person came to him and wanted to convert and said he wants to hear the Torah on one foot. What did he say? What you would hate if it was done to you, don't do to your friend. This is the entire Torah. The rest is commentary. Go and learn it. Simcha, joy, is the crux of the entire Torah, of the whole Torah. To be joyous in our observance of Torah, and that takes us back to the name of the Parsha-Ki, Tavo, that the way we observe Torah should be in a way where we enter into the observance with our entire being. And Simcha, joy, is particularly relevant in our times because Simcha, joy, has the ability to break through all boundaries. One of the curses in this week's Parsha that's listed is a result of lack of simcha, of lack of joy, because you didn't serve God, your God, with joy and with gladness of heart when you had an abundance of everything. It doesn't say because you didn't serve Hashem. It says because you didn't serve Hashem with joy. And joy is very powerful. Simcha, joy, has the ability to break through all boundaries. And that's why we know that Mashiach is the descendant of Peretz. What does Peretz mean? Peretz is from the word poretz, to break through, to break boundaries. And the Rebbe says, because of this, he makes a suggestion and a request that we increase in joy with the intent of actually bringing Mashiach and the true and complete redemption. So in previous generations, in order to bring Mashiach, we know from the times of the Alter Rebbe, the call of the day was Teshuvah. La'alta l'tshuva, la'alta l'gula. That when we will accomplish Teshuvah, returning to Hashem, then the Geula will come, then the redemption will come. By the time we were at the era of the Frierdiker Rebbe, the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson, he said, Teshuvah has been accomplished. All we have to do now is put the icing on the cake, polish the buttons, the finishing touches, and that will bring Mashiach. And the Rebbe said that so much time has passed since the Alter Rebbe, now since the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, and the Rebbe said he doesn't understand why Mashiach come. All the times that our sages said, all the appointed times for Mashiach's coming have already passed, and surely every Jew has had a thought of Teshuvah. So the Rebbe said, what's left to do? What is there left to do? How are we going to bring about the revelation of Mashiach? And the Rebbe says, I suggest that the approach is the expression of simcha, of joy, specifically with the intention of bringing about the redemption. And surely this joy, the Rebbe says, will lead to the ultimate joy that we describe in Tehillim, Oz Yimale Schok Pina. Then our mouths will be filled with laughter and with joy, and we will all celebrate the revelation and the redemption and the rebuilding of the Beis Hamikdash. It should be speedily in our days. We should have a blessed
Amen.
Elul, the Elul that from this week where we read the curses that should fulfill all and any Jews, and we should enter the new year already with brachas, with blessings. Actually, many people think that Elul is the end of the year, but there are those who say, no, Elul is not the end of the year. Elul is the beginning of the year. So we're already done with the curses from last year, and we should really begin to see the brachas in a revealed way as we are in this month of Elul. I want to wish everybody
Amen.
and